Good day, this is Latynina and Alexey Arestovych. Good day, Alexey. Hello, Yulia. Please do not forget to subscribe to my channel, to Alexey's channel, and to click like button and to ask questions if you are watching us live. Alright, I will start with turning to you, Alexey, for help, because I figured out I stopped not only to understand what things happening mean, but also I'm dumbfounded trying to understand what actually is happening. And one of the things that I do not understand, for example, first question is very simple. There is Financial Times, for example, which wrote that Trump and Zelenskyy during their meeting did not go well, and Trump was basically forcing Zelenskyy to give up Donbass to Russia. And on the other hand, we see the letter from European Union leaders who support the joint plan with Zelenskyy and Trump about freezing the war, not even along the border, but along the current front line. And I'm trying to understand the current position of Trump and the current position of Zelenskyy. Is Trump indeed forcing Zelenskyy to give up Donbass, or did he demand to freeze Russia alongside the front line currently? So was he demanding like Putin wants, or was he demanding like Zelenskyy wants? And who spilled wrong data to Financial Times in one case? If he indeed was pushing Zelenskyy to give up Donbass, then why European leaders ascribe a different position to Trump? So I am at a loss. What is his real position, and when did he change it? Yulia, we do not know his exact real position. We know what the inner circle is talking about that, and the taxi drivers, so-called, as I like to refer to them. And we can also calculate what exactly is happening. Because, like I teach in the art of thinking, you need to work with numbers. You have different information coming from different sources. And technically, for example, it could look like you have different digital rows, 735, 504, 512. What is common? Common is number 5, right? If 115 sources recall number 5 and a ton of other numbers, then with a high probability you can take that number 5 as not a source, but as the most probable hypothesis. So let's see and analyze what is common between these writings. Everybody is still confirming that Trump is intending to finish the war in Ukraine. He was promising that during his election campaign. This was one of the loudest slogans during his campaign. He was accusing Biden in a lot of things. He continues to do it now. He already undertook a ton of effort, and he is still taking more effort. He extinguished, according to his words, how many? 7, 8, 10, right, between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But Russian-Ukrainian war is still ongoing, but he undertakes regular efforts to stop it. In winter, in summer, in spring. Out of the recent events, they were talking in Anchorage, remember? There were different ideas floating around, call for an aerial ceasefire, complete ceasefire. As a result, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs comes out and says that we need complete conclusion of this war. For that, we need 4 districts. And Crimea, everything is simple and easy to remember. His all-time ultimatum. Implementation of sanctions means that Russian position was not accepted, and they did not agree. So Donbass was not demanded by Trump to give up by Zelenskyy to Putin. I don't think it happened. Usually these things are not pushed during negotiations. Usually being flexible is more encouraged. You can point to historic precedents in Korea, in Germany, that borders do change every 15 years roughly. One thing is today, one thing is tomorrow. Putin is not forever. These are the things that are told during negotiations. It is highly unlikely and uncommon to be brought up in a different fashion of, hey, you have to give up this district. Because everything is protocoled, everything remains in archives. Nobody wants to have that blemish on your biography. Then I do have a question. Who leaked such a scene to Financial Times, or maybe Financial Times sucked it out of their finger, while you're describing that this scene of Trump chasing Zelenskyy to give up Donbass during their meeting could not have happened. Well, Yulia, how do press get their information? They meet different advisors, ex-advisors, who tell them under different pretense that, listen, I have something to share with you, and it's only for you. If you refer to me or reference me in this article, I will have huge issues in my life, so please be mum about your source. Then same sources, or maybe a general or somebody else, is leaking another information or pretending to leak another information to a different journalist from a different source, and they paint a different picture. Then these journalists reach out to each other eventually. They're usually picked in the way so that they do communicate, and then they share these two different angles. When representatives of two warring agencies or two warring sides of parties in the country leaked different things, that's when they start posting all this stuff. So according to this description, Alexey, this fakery should have been born in Britain, maybe. I don't think it's of Ukrainian or American origin. Well, Yulia, to order a high-level article in the Western world today is maybe $150,000. So that's not a big deal. The statement of this caliber probably costs a bit more. But what is 120? Average Ukrainian corruptioner spends that a month. So this is really pocket change for them. Or those who resist the oligarch's position, right? So, okay, Alexey, then position of Trump is to freeze the war along the front, right? Well, exact Trump's position we do not know. His position can be described as we need to stop it. He gave enough time to both sides, and basically he continues to say that both sides need to accept some mutually acceptable terms, and his rhetoric hasn't changed in the last couple years. It's just Ukrainian media often omit the elements of pressure when that happens or is being leaked to them, and Russian media in return, of course, hyperinflates any pressure on Ukraine. So each side prefers to pick what looks better for them, unless they want to instigate another wave against Trump or Trump phobia. Then they disclose something counter general sentiment of their country. I'm remembering here, Alexey, that Putin did mention that freezing along the front is unacceptable, and he's saying this is what Europe needs. He has already seen that in Minsk agreements and other ones before. He thinks that if he freezes war, Ukraine gets pumped with arms, and then the war starts all over again. So he wants a final paper and the final condition to agree, final term that he can agree to. So, situation when Russian troops are attacking, successfully moving, he sees as unacceptable to freeze that war, to go with this situation. I don't know why would he agree to that. Exactly, Yulia, this is absolutely unreal. He continues steamrolling, and that's why he is now facing more sanctions from Europe and United States. So at its core, situation looks like this. Trump, for 9 months, is continuing to offer Putin and Russia an ideal exit from this situation, with saving some territory, with alleviating sanctions, with saving face, with opportunity to proclaim themselves a winner, to establish new relations with Europe and states. But Russia, after this double offer, has not followed it, did not agree to it. This is what is behind Budapest meeting being cancelled. In order to cancel the meeting of that level, you have to have significant negative effects, right? Negative things affecting it, which is the core of the problem. Russia is not agreeing to other terms. It demands 4 districts and Crimea, and this is not acceptable for Trump. Freezing along the front is what probably satisfies Trump, is what Zelenskyy confirmed in Brussels. And as a sign that his meeting with Trump was rather a failure for Zelenskyy, he met with European leaders right away after United States meeting. Instead, he met with them immediately, and that's usually a sign that something did not go right. If everything was okay, they could meet a month later, 2 months later with European leaders to discuss how they split the money and support. What public does not notice at large, that Zelenskyy keeps changing his positions very rapidly. About half a year ago, he was saying we will fight to the last Ukrainian. Now he's ready to discuss the freezing lines. He is ready to sign peace treaty along the front, and he would prefer Russia to be forced to sign this treaty. But he doesn't want to give the territory beyond the front line. I did not like, Alexey, the word, how he changes his opinion. And this is a rather negative connotation, that changing position under pressure of circumstance, that there is something negative in that. Well, Yulia, I'm here poking fun not at Zelenskyy, but at those who usually use such a term. The main changer, or the main windsock in this situation is Putin. Over 20 years of his career, he made a 180 rotation from his original position, from the best friend of the West to the worst enemy of the West. Wait, do I understand it correctly, Alexey, that Trump's position the first 2 times he met Putin was much better for Putin than his today's position, the freezing along the front line? Because, as you mentioned, today's position is a bit unreal, and that today's suggestion from Trump is probably an instrument and pressure. All right, Yulia, everybody there in politics changes their opinion, depending on new circumstance, change of position of China, position of Europe, other factors in Middle East and Africa. They always keep correcting their position. Ballpark, it can be summarized as concessions from Putin would surprise Ukrainians, and perhaps they still will. Maybe there is a chance for that. It was mentioned on high levels that Putin is ready to give up Kherson and Zaporozhye districts if he gets Donbass and Lugansk back. But this cannot be the first suggestion in the package. This can only be done in exchange for serious other concessions. Normalizing relations with the West, promises that neither Europe nor Russia will be a threat to each other. And it depends how it is being presented, what is presented after, what is the step 1, step 2. And depending upon the success of the first offer, the second may get on the table or may not get on the table, or it may be deferred to later times when this is agreed. So Trump was suggesting different things. He initially, remember, was suggesting to give up 4 districts and they'll give enough bonuses to Ukraine, so they'll be happy too. And when Russia disagreed to that offer, the other side was, I will give Tomahawks to Ukraine and to hell with you. Right? So medium line for in between these two extremes would be freezing the effort along the front and forcing Russia to peace through the system of pressure. Nothing changed. That story has been going since March of 22, since Istanbul agreements. Why were they abandoned on the 17th of May? And I would remind here our listeners that Bucha did not cancel these negotiations. They continued for over a month, almost 2 months after that. I was a participant of that. And that was the position that was being discussed. that Rammstein will give so much help to Ukraine that Russia will agree to freezing along the front line. Most of the world agenda basically goes to diminishing the demands of Russia, diminishing that June ultimatum of Putin. And Russian position is, yes, we can somewhat shrink our appetite, but we need to win in some other aspect. And Russia is always adding Ukraine to a bigger picture from Arctic to China. And depending upon concessions or decisions in a geopolitical situation, they are ready to move on the Ukrainian matter. They never were hiding that. Even Putin in his Valdai meetings was always hinting at this as a probability. Now, usually, after things are agreed upon behind the scenes, leaders somewhat leak certain angles to that agreement in different meetings. Putin, just on this year, twice or thrice hinted at possible giving up some territories to Ukraine. Remember, he talked about possible referendum on the occupied territories, different ways. Therefore, Russians continue to pressure that they want 4 districts in Crimea, demilitarization, denazification, and this is our list that we do not want to give up. If you do not agree with that, we will continue fighting. The Western Ukraine position is that you guys are too bold, your list is too long, we can agree to a shorter list, and a shorter list would include freezing along the front line, non-intervention to Ukrainian politics, and for that we'll remove some sanctions. This is ballpark the story, and that doesn't really change. This is the core of contradictions and the sum of this conflict. During the times of the war, positions have not seriously fluctuated. There were some changes by China and his position to be involved or not be involved, but nothing major. Alexey, then my question is, how much relation to military reality does Putin's position have? Because as I understand, Russia has accumulated enough military might at the moment, and they perform significant pressure on Ukrainian side, on the front, in near Pokrovsk, and a lot of other hotspots on the front, and they have some partial successes, as I understand. So what is happening in this regard? How much demands of Russia or demands of the West look adequate if you look at them through the prism of what's happening on the ground? Well, Yulia, what's happening on the ground is also a rather strange and ballpark category, because it depends upon which side is using this prism. Russian propaganda is bluffing and saying that tomorrow your front will collapse and will take the whole Ukraine. The West points out that Russians embellish successes on the front, and they sincerely believe that their future success will be fairy tale-like, so it's difficult to talk to them. The West calculates what is happening on the ground in Russian economy, in Russian military, and they're very reserved about their successes. And they do acknowledge that, yes, they do grind through Ukrainian forces, but you were talking about capture of Pokrovsk a year ago, and we're still talking about Pokrovsk a year from that. Russian troops are in Pokrovsk now, but still not fully taken. And since Avdiivka, Russia has not taken another township in over a year. They might be able to take Kupiansk and Pokrovsk, right? Kupiansk is 2/3 taken, but formally not completely. So perhaps when they do. So Russian tempo of pushing forward is increasing, indeed. They have been increasing since the beginning of the year. But if you measure it with townships, which is not the best measuring point, but ballpark, very popularized version of it, there is not much happening on the front in this case. Same Kursk operation when Ukraine did counteroffensives, Liman, when our troops were standing and guarding everything there, and people were expecting that push to not find its hold in Liman, but It depends. You can paint different corners. In some parts, Ukrainians did counteroffensive. In others, Russians continue to push. Overall, Russian armed forces have significant successes on the battlefront since the 1st of January of this year. That's one. These successes, however, are not matching the claims of Ukrainian propaganda that Russian army did not capture anything. This is not true. And Ukrainian propaganda is insisting more and more that we can continue fighting for another 100 years and Russians will die soon. And Russian successes also do not match their propaganda, which is saying that just another push and the whole Ukraine will collapse. So, somewhere in the middle. That's number two. This is reality. What is the potentiality of it? Now, if Russia succeeds in mobilizing its citizens for more troops, that may change the situation. And this would be the factor that is being discussed. This is definitely a factor. Does Russia have this possible card to play? Yes, they most likely do. Now, does the West have enough arms and resources to counter that? Sure, they do too. Ukraine can grow at least enough military to hold the front on the same line. How do you expect Ukraine to do that, Alexey? Oh, they can just become made harsher for mobilization. They're already spilling in some possible ways. For example, one of the congressmen today mentioned that women are hiding behind the backs of men. In many countries they do serve, so there's that venue. They can also decrease the age of the men being drafted. They can mobilize women to serve in non-fighting positions. And of course they can continue being more brutal in drafting efforts. Do you think, Alexei, there'll be any uprising in Ukraine against that? No. They can only probably create certain local resistance, but if the West at large will not be objecting to hardened efforts of mobilizations, they will probably be suppressed. And trust me, Ukraine could do even devilish things like cordon one area of the city and pick everybody there they find, and if need be, they can even enter the houses, private houses and apartments looking for people. Constitutional court is non-functioning in Ukraine. There's nobody to counter presidential efforts. So Ukraine generally has this potentiality. What it points us to is that the war, in the way it is going, can continue for the whole 2026. And most likely, this is one of the scenarios that it will go through. Because positions of both sides are not comparable, are not matching. Only big, successful events on one of the sides when the other will fail can change it. If Russia manages to mobilize 300,000 and throw them on the front, that will definitely change situation. Ukraine will just, if, for example, will not have enough time to counter that, the front may indeed start to collapse. In Russia, they do have a capacity for training, about 100,000, but it will take them at least 6 months with that capacity to bring 300,000 people. And that time window, the West will be able to react and bring us more new munitions and new tools, and Ukraine can also harshen mobilization effort. Second option, if the West all of a sudden gives Ukraine a ton of military equipment and we start destroying Russian targets at large, right? Third card, Ukraine succeeded in mobilizing, brings another 100, 200,000 people to the front, and we finally would have enough density on the front to slow Russians down to basically a stalemate. What will remain from Ukraine in this case? Oh, that's question number 2, Yulia. We have 1.5 million men hiding right now. If only we recruit 200,000 of that, Ukraine will not really change much. So, meantime, Russia is relying on its capability of increasing the effort, and they do have some support of China if they need to. The West is also resisting because they have not invoked the most crippling sanctions against Russia, which could create significant economic issues for Putin's regime. Not that Russia will collapse immediately, but Russia will probably feel a sudden urge to go and negotiate. Ukraine is resisting because they do understand that it has enough potentiality, and the West is not really cutting Ukraine off from support. So nobody has a serious argument. None of the sides do, and the sides do not fall for anything that is on the table right now. Meantime, they're trying to contain the armed conflict in the framework that exists, and it can continue in such framework till 2027 if nothing significant changes. This will continue riding as it rides. Okay, to summarize it, positions of both sides are not compatible, Alexey, and it seems that it will be solved on the ground until both sides or one of the sides decides to come to agreement. Exactly, Yulia, and this is where the statement of Trump about implementing more sanctions indicates too that another attempt to find peaceful resolution failed, and everybody is now looking at the front and figuring out what is happening there on the ground and in the air. One more news we didn't talk about. Russia is trying to open a second front. That's an option. It's not happening yet, but that's something that we have not discussed as an option. Russia could open a second front in Europe. Alexey, more news coming that we have 3 oil refineries burning. One is burning in Romania, one in Hungary, supporting Slovakia and the others. And I see Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sikorski probably, yes, him. They're already welcoming these oil refineries burning, together with the sanctions applied against Lukoil. So some sanctions came as drones, another as sanctions against Russia. Yeah, 3 factories is interesting. Could be a diversion, but question is who is doing it. Could be one part of Europe against the other. Could be Ukrainians against Russian refineries or those who help Russians in Europe. And the third, Russians could be doing it to themselves, creating certain political interest or refrain in Europe. Alexey, we, I think, went through that with the Nord Stream, right? These explosions happened after Poles released somebody who was a suspect in the Nord Stream explosions and saying that they want to give a military order to that person, but since it's a court, we can't, but we release him. So, Yulia, I mentioned just 3 different theories who could be doing that. I'm leaning towards Ukraine doing it, because this is quite in our character and we demonstrated that we are capable of doing it. Yeah, this is a significant correction to those 3 versions, because otherwise we may also acknowledge that Trotsky perhaps could have been killed as a result of the family quarrel. Right. But significantly, yeah, I had to mention, Yulia, 2 other options, and it's just that Ukrainian theory has longer legs, I think. I also want to mention here, Alexey, that Radoslav Sikorsky expressing some hope that Major Magyar will finally succeed in destroying gas pipe Druzhba, friendship, that goes from Russia through Ukraine. And do you think this is happening because some part of Europe has blessed it? Or because part of Europe that wants to support Ukraine just averts its eyes from these problems? Well, at least you can see that Poland is not against it, right? Not extraditing this aspect of a crime that general prosecutors of Germany demanded to be extradited. This is a political position. So at least it's Poland, and we can suspect it's not just Poland in this camp. All right, I wanted to also finish up with some prognosis regarding the front, because I saw I saw prognostication by John Mershammer, who is quite close to what you sometimes refer to, that Russia may get 8 districts of Ukraine, so 40% of the pre-war Ukraine. There'll be only a small, about the 60% of Ukraine remaining, and that will not be joining NATO. Yes, Yulia, this option may happen under certain conditions, but I would say this would be the most unfavorable option for Ukraine. And it's not correct to expect that this will be the most likely option. Usually Ukraine goes somewhere along the middle path, along C out of A to F, right? His option is close to F. Capturing additional districts may only happen if Russia succeeds ideally and Ukraine and the West fail with everything they do. Then yes. Again, this would be a change of Russian agenda. Putin would have to change his position again and somehow sell it to the West, to China and India as well. Right now, in their constitution is 4 districts and Crimea. For over a year, they have not been changing this ultimatum, regardless of Chinese Xi Jinping visiting Moscow, Modi visiting Putin, Trump quarreling with Modi, Modi being re-elected, and suddenly Russia did not fret along all that, and now they suddenly would need to change that. They would need a serious basis. Well, Alexey, they may not change the ultimatum. They can maybe perhaps capture them. Well, what is to capture, Yulia? Capture in Russian terms is very slow. They have been capturing Pokrovsk for over a year, so if we add 4 more districts, how long it will take them? I can agree with that, Alexey, because they are not too fast. And the Center of International Research also reviews 2 possible options. One is they look at Mersheimer's projection and say that this is less probable, although not impossible. And the second one, they say, the Center of Strategic and International Research, which is also rather profitable for Moscow, an eternal war of low intensity that leaves Ukraine to be some sort of purgatory, and Putin continues to enjoy whatever he wants. Yeah, I can agree with that, that if we project that this war continues for the next 10 to 15 years, just like as it goes now, Russia then might take 6 to 8 districts in this time frame. They will have to lose 3 million dead, and Ukraine probably will lose a lot of people. And Western Russian economy that Ukraine can reach will probably be destroyed, and most of Ukrainian economy will be destroyed too. But it will take them maybe 5, 7, 10 years. And ongoing conflict that sometimes flares up and then comes down. Most countries that have ongoing conflicts, that's how they go. Peace, peace, then suddenly there's a flare up, and some jets got up, flew, destroyed something, some special forces went to some near the border operation, or some vessels collided at sea. Could be. And what will happen with Europe in this time frame, do you think? Oh, Europe will militarize itself, Yulia. And it is already doing that. Sierto is already talking about that. He acknowledged that pro-military leaders have prevailed in Europe who are betting on increasing military-industrial complex and equipping Europe, with military equipment and proper-sized armies and everything. Also, it's taking anti-immigrant measures. They're somewhat under the carpet. They're not trying to stir too much reaction, but I just saw before the stream that, for example, Portugal banned hijabs, and European taxi drivers, as I call them, are saying the following, that migrants are slowly being pushed away, LGBT agenda is being dropped, and Europe is aiming to get to a condition where Russia would not be able to talk to them from the position of power. But it would take them about 10 years, 5 to 10 years to get there. And these are plans, so we'll see if they will succeed in getting there. Do you really think Europe will be able to achieve that goal? Because I'm looking at the German economy that used to be the locomotive of Europe. And I don't see it now. I see the Dutch taking away Xperia from China, but it turns out to be a significant issue for them, more than a profit. It causes other ripples economically in Europe. Then I see that group in European Parliament is demanding to audit 17 billion euros that European Commission gave to different non-government organizations who are fighting for immigrants, transgenders, global warming, and all that. How can they be called non-government organization when they're getting so much money from the government? And that's a more philosophical question. Or I do see in the news that in Netherlands, every Somali immigrant costs a budget 1.2 million euros during their lifetime. And when Merz is opening mouth and saying something about migrants, I see some activists getting 120,000 against Merz, who is supposedly racist, and there are those girls walking with cardboards, brothers of Ukrainian cardboards that are written with different slogans to the effect that we're not afraid of migrants, we're afraid of racist Merz. So I am full of questions whether European elite that is in power now, whether they're even capable to conduct militarization of Europe. Or because when I'm looking at all these hustling by European diplomats who offer unreachable options, unreachable and unagreeable peaceful plans, I have only one obvious answer, that the guys do want the war to continue. And I also start to have ideas that the story is above the level of competence, same as this war is beyond the level of competence of Ukrainian authorities right now. I'm sorry. Well, Yulia, if they would not be changing, they would not be doing an audit of those 17 billion euros. Oh, this is a private initiative. This is a private initiative of the people on the right who are being pushed away from elections in Europe. Well, Yulia, there are patriots in Europe for migrants, and there are patriots for reviewing of where we spend our money. In Europe, we already have 9 right-leaning governments, out of which we can say that 3 could be called ultra-right or very right. And this trend is growing. Centric and left-centric countries and governments already have discredited themselves significantly, but even these governments on the left have already signed away so much money for military revival that nobody wants to stop that. They're still pushing out a lot of criminal migrants from Europe. Like in Germany, they took the whole clan. They gave 1,000 euros, 1,200 euros per person, and just extradited all of them back to Syria. And for me, it is obvious. It would be somewhat questionable for Europe leaders to come out with these statements, but there is a certain motion in Europe to make sure that by 2035 there'll be very few migrants to Europe. What serves as the factual support to that? The degree that police started to work in all European countries against pro-Palestine meetings. Really? Oh, you haven't seen? I keep seeing people being captured for likes. No. Look at the recent German and French police actions. They take position in favor of Palestinian country, Palestine as a country, but pro-Palestine meetings are being disbanded with maximum force. And police is never initiating any of this. It's not their initiative to be forceful or not. They're always being told how to. And what I'm seeing, they're being told to be very hard. Now, why so? Because, okay, accepting Palestine as a country, that's one issue. That's loyalty of Arabic countries, and that's a plus for Europe. But they were other protests, and the protests of support of Palestine have nothing to do with acknowledging the country, so they're being disbanded, they're being pushed out. In Britain, there was about over 1 million people protesting the current politics and supporting pro-British lines. Official media were talking about 150,000, but I've been there, I've seen that with my own eyes, it was over 1 million. So the trend is undeniable, and it will take them some time, but I believe they will get to a certain point. And Europe is already starting from a good position. They have 2,000 jets. This is in the armed forces together. This is a significant number. What do you think United States will say about that? Because I think their first idea, Alexey, was to make a big buffer state from Europe that does not have its own army. Trump now wants Europe to pay more money and to build up their military. No, United States will support that. Both Republicans and Democrats will sell their arms to Europe with pleasure, and with pleasure they will occupy the oil and gas markets of Europe. That's exactly what they're doing. All right, let's also go back to some other things that are happening in front of us, and I don't know exactly how to describe what I'm seeing. So about Tomahawks, they vanished into the sunset, and Trump gave a speech that one can read as he was never going to give them really, because it takes over a year to learn how to use them. So this was more from the elements of pressure to exert on Putin, but not the real thing. But later Trump said that they allowed Ukraine to use long-range missiles as far as they can, but Trump, media said that, and Trump came out later and said that this is a false, fake news. However, he said that if these missiles will fly, this will not be from the United States. So here I am made of questions whether Ukraine has long-range missiles or not, and I don't care which ones, whether it's Flamingo or Hellfire or Pekla, Ukrainian-made, and what is the position of Trump. Well, those who don't know, Storm Shadow worked, I think, yesterday on the chemical factory in Bryansk in Russia that is manufacturing explosives, but Bryansk is the near city to the border. So the news that was mentioned that the limit on the range missile was lifted. So yeah, Storm Shadow is not Ukrainian for now. They're German and British, and they fly for 500, 700 kilometers. That's rather far. How do you limit it? And we'll see their use, because using missiles on the long-range targets in Russia, that differs from the results that UAVs can carry. Again, everybody has smartphones, people will take videos of that, and everybody will see how it happens. For now, we only hear that it's Ukrainian propaganda that is saying that. But we will see the actual results when they start flying. When the missiles indeed will start hitting targets beyond 500 kilometers in the depth of Russian Federation, that's when we can talk that something is being used. Right now, not so impressive. And I can predict Alexey's reaction of Putin in this case. Even if it's not Tomahawks, he'll probably say that these missiles are being targeted with help of United States or Great Britain, and now he's officially conducting war with both. Or at least will threaten. Okay, he might. What does it change? A third world war? No, there won't be a third world war, Yulia. How do you think Putin will react? Well, he'll be screaming and squealing and demanding aid from maybe China or Korea. Maybe he will conduct some provocations against Europe more intensively, maybe not under the threshold, sub-threshold, but actually above threshold actions. For example, here's green man appearing in Estonia, for example. And what then? Well, some unknown armed people would take over some of the islands. Well, there'll be an interesting situation for Estonia, whether to destroy them by force or to conduct long negotiations. Negotiations will always flow in the same format. If you stop hitting our long-range targets with your Tomahawks, we will remove those green men from your borders. So you think that the appearing of those green soldiers on Estonian land is real? Yeah, as an option, Russian Federation has it. Well, they will probably say that they're local patriots who are doing that. Right, Narva People's Republic. In Narva, how many Russian-speaking population they have? 95%? Yeah, no Russian influence. They're just the patriots uprising. We've went through that in Ukraine and Donbass and Crimea. Still, I think, Alexey, this is a step towards the third war. Estonia is a member of NATO. No, Yulia, I don't believe there'll be any third world war. The Overton window has passed a long time ago. The attacks of oil refineries with drones in the NATO countries, that technically is an event that can start third world war. And even under Biden, when Russian jet destroyed American drone in the Black Sea, right? Or when Biden destroyed some of the Putin's soldiers in a third country, they had 200 dead. No third world war, nothing happening. Same situation here. You do not start a third world war, a nuclear war, because of some several hundred green men on the islands in Estonia. All right, so Putin does have this Wagner-like mechanism to use, I acknowledge. All right, so EU and the United States still have a mechanism, and I want to turn to you for some understanding, to understand how difficult it is. EU adopted 19th package of sanctions. Everything is very touchy there. They basically forbade suppliers to sell roses, rhododendrons, azaleas, kid strollers, and toys for kids to Russia. So I don't know if Russia can survive without kids' toys. Most of them are being brought and sold from China anyway. But American sanctions, they slapped sanctions on two biggest Russian oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft, were hit. And I wonder how serious is that? Listen, Yulia, I'm not the economist. It's difficult for me to estimate how serious that is. Do taxi drivers like saying anything? No, they don't. They think these sanctions are sensitive, touchy, but not serious. They were factually stating that they have not slammed any serious sanctions from the United States. We're still negotiating. There was another news. There is an interesting audit company who got a request from British government to verify all crypto purchases and transfers coming and going from Ukraine. And this is a very serious company that actually did cost Moldova its government. The government ordered the audit from this company and then had to resign because members of this government were stealing. So this also remains as a record, and it can be requested by an ex-government. So that may be an interesting financial investigation of all the machinations of Ukrainian government. And that went rather quietly under the radar, but this is one of the most serious news in the sphere of the Western audit of Ukrainian corruption and public. So this is a pressure, and this is a significant hint as a pressure on both sides. Trump said yesterday, rather precisely, that both sides will have to forfeit something. Well, we just discussed, Alexey, that considering so different interests that Ukraine and Russia represent, And also, I'm under impression that European bureaucrats, they are producing some legal restraints, and it's almost like they're a function of body. And since they want to present some nicer looking bureaucratic document, one of the results of that is that the positions of both sides are so different, cannot be married to each other, and both sides have to, or end up resorting to figuring it out, duking it out on the battlefront. And yeah, Yulia, nobody is going to forfeit anything. They're not ready for it. Everybody's fighting, honestly fighting. All right, let me ask you another question, Alexey. What happened at the possible meeting of Trump and Zelenskyy? What possibly happened there? Any new information surfacing about it? No, I don't know what else I can talk about in regards to that meeting, except for the ones I already mentioned. Okay, so we discussed that, but I want to summarize it, I guess. Donald Trump refused from meeting Putin in Budapest. He doesn't want to spend time in vain for a futile meeting, and let's see what happens. In the next 2 days, we will inform you about our actions, and this is a quote. A lot of things are happening. So, how did the idea came about the meeting in Budapest? Well, it was simple. The United States suggested that they will be giving Tomahawks to Ukraine, and implied that they will be increasing military pressure on Russia if Russia doesn't come to the table, and Moscow said, okay, let's discuss. Then Zelenskyy came for a visit, and I cannot transfer Tomahawks because otherwise I won't have negotiation with Moscow. So it was announced that Ukraine is not getting Tomahawks, and Moscow used Lavrov's voice to say, we don't believe in Tomahawks, this is just bluff, we do not change our position, we have nothing else to talk about, so there is nothing to discuss, we're not coming. And we need to either increase pressure somehow or cancel the meeting. And Trump canceled the meeting and increased the pressure via sanctions. I also heard another interesting point, Alexey, that American president is not meeting with anybody more than twice in a cadence. No, Yulia, this is not true. Trump can meet 1,000,000 times, especially on such an important matter. He is just not ready to move on the really painful points for Russia, such as armaments for Ukraine and more advanced military tools. Now, what most people do not understand, what the West is doing, this is not military supply of Ukraine. This is signals to Russia. Signals to correct its position. Wait, Alexey, why would Russia need to correct the position? Exactly. That's, if it's just a signal, why do they need to correct? That's exactly what's happening, Yulia. Since it's a hint, a sign, a signal, doesn't change anything, why Russia needs to change its position. If the Americans transfer 40 Tomahawks to Ukraine, will it change anything? Probably not. 200, maybe 200 will, not so much. If Americans transfer 2,000 Tomahawks, that might change. All right, on the other hand, Alexei, I think that Europeans have several points that need to follow: return of children, sanctions on companies, etc. Yulia, this is just a declaration. Right, that's what I'm reading, that frozen reserves of Russian companies will be spent to rebuild Ukraine, according to European statement. And I am made of questions. Do you understand that European bureaucrats who wrote this declaration, somewhere between fighting with global warming and setting up the eternal victory of gender equality, that when a crocodile sees that list of demands that is absolutely unrealistic and does not reflect the situation on the front, Russian crocodile says, well, okay, I will continue fighting. Yes, Yulia, this is declaration. In Kremlin, they understand this is just a declaration, because this is the same zone of politics that touches upon all these non-government organizations, forums about changing Russia, that they need to repent, fall apart, get a grant or a photo session, or exchange business cards. Hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats and non-government organizations live off that. And I participated in these events at some point of my life quite a bit until I understood the core value of them, what are they for, and now I'm refusing. And there are people who live on that for years, for decades. They're making the whole career of that. Same as Ukrainian Congress Rada adopted the law about interacting with decolonized peoples of Russia. The value of that law is less than the value of the last year's newspaper that somebody living under the bridge wrapped his stale sandwich in. So this is grant-eating people producing documents sponsored by these grants. In Kremlin, they definitely understand what has power, what doesn't have. And there are only two things that can change reality, that have enough force to do so. Number one is transfer of significant volumes of armaments and military equipment and aid in using that for Ukraine to use it against Russian Federation and its economic and military targets. And economic sanctions. First, armaments are not really being transferred to Ukraine in the required volumes. Not a single moment since 2022 they were. At the peak of the transfer, Ukraine was only getting enough to hold Russian attack. That calls the quantitative advantages Russians had in certain parts of the front. And only on certain nomenclature of the items. There was never set a full system of support. There's never just one type of armament that will change everything. What else Ukraine is getting? Intel, financial help, as elements of restraining Russia. And sanctions against Russia were never crippling. All those 19 packages, they never were crippling. Because the West never, in bold letters here, never wanted to spoil their relations with Russia, much less to cripple or destroy it. That's why Ukrainian side is so upset, and they have right to be so, and always upset that those HIMARS took forever to transfer, that everybody in the West, apparently looking to them as impotents, who are disabled mentally and cannot understand what Putin really is. And when Russian propagandists are screaming that they're fighting with NATO, that NATO 56 countries are supplying arms to Ukraine, and Russia is successfully fighting this war, we cannot be serious about these screams, right? Not a single times there was built a system of armaments transfer higher than the level of brigade. This is about nothing. And besides that, I told you that even before the counteroffensive that United States bet so much on back in the day, those positions that Ukrainian General Command requested support for from the United States, I, as somebody who was privy to these documents, who saw what was in them, on the most needed nomenclature, there was nothing excessive. There was actually, the way Ukraine asked it was on the lower threshold of what is needed for counteroffensive. Our demands were fulfilled at the highest at 28%. On average, it was 15, maybe 18%. So if we asked for 100 rifles, we get 18. If we asked for 100 bombs and missiles, we got 15. And this was at the pivotal moment of war that could become a pivotal moment. It could become a breaking point. So the West did not even come to this war. They're like wagging their tail, and that's where the aid is coming from. And they're not going so far to do any escalations with Russia. Transferring 200 Bradley machines for the biggest war in Europe, this is about nothing. Yeah, and they're promising some missiles and some other vehicles, right, within the next 15 years. And this is for future development of Ukraine in the future, not for immediate fight. So yes, in the future, when Sweden will finish and will need to rearm some of the Ukrainian Air Force, we'll give you some of the green pins and we'll teach your pilots and train you. This is not for the immediate war. How many F-16s were transferred? And how long did it take them to transfer one? A year. This is not about war, Julia. This is not about winning in this war. The real aid to win in this war was only from North Korea. They really gave significant volumes of armaments to Russia, as was recorded later. And they actually were in the front and they fought there. And that's it. End of the first hour.